Hello, social workers, mental health professionals, and change agents. Welcome to another episode of the Social Work Rants podcast. I'm your host, Bass Moreno. Saludos a todos. Greetings, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, tapping in wherever you are watching or listening to this podcast. I really appreciate all the love and support. Gracias a todos por su apoyo, por escuchando o viendo el podcast. Lo agradezco mucho. Follow the podcast on Instagram at the Social Work Rants Podcast. That's all one word. Follow the podcast on Twitter at Social Work Rants and hit that like button on type in the Social Work Rants Podcast on Facebook, aka Meta. Tune in, tap in. Of course, hit that red subscribe button on YouTube. Rate the podcast on Spotify. Rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. Rate it, comment, let me know what you think. This episode is brought to you by Bass City Entertainment, your home for online holistic self-care for social workers, mental health professionals, and other change agents, featuring my poetry book, Triumph Through Pain, How to Maximize Your Full Potential During Down Times. Future bestseller. Make sure you get it. For those who cop the book, I really, truly appreciate it. Definitely leave a review on Amazon. It's available in paperback and also on Kindle. And speaking of books, don't forget to cop Latinx and Social Work Volume 2. And how to see it with my background. But there you go. A little glimpse of it. And which leads to my guest is one of my fellow co-authors, contributing authors to the book, Antonio Morales, LCSW, repping Brooklyn to the fullest. What's good, bro?
What up? What's popping? I'm just burning some. I'm burning some sage. You said holistic, so I said let me burn some sage real quick.
There you go.
Get the energy right. You know.
Yeah, but
you never know.
got
like sage, so it calms me. It calms me. It calms me.
Got, like Kyrie burning the sage before playing.
Yeah, so I really appreciate you having me on here on your podcast. I've seen a few episodes of it, so
thank you.
Yeah.
Now that I'm glad to have you on. As this recording, I just had finished, getting ready to do some research and read your chapter. Your chapter was the first chapter. I finally, I mean, I touched the book plenty of times, but to actually read it, it was a struggle to try to read it. But I'm like, I gotta get ready for this podcast. So let me read your chapter. I read some other things as well. So, no, definitely, your topic definitely hits home, especially with the last several years of the nonsense that's going on in this country with the white supremacy and KKK. We got a racist ex-president and all his call him the Foot Clan. one by one, they're going to jail, and it's like the main henchmen, like they got all this evidence. Like, Conyo, when you gonna freaking arrest this dude already? Like, how much evidence do you need? And it's like he's still out there talking trash, and we got other people still talking trash that fall in line with him.
I mean, when I think about, let me just introduce myself because I didn't formally introduce myself. So, my name is Antonio Morales. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, specifically in New Jersey, getting my license in New York. And I'm the founder of the Liberated Self Therapeutic Services, which is a private practice that's really dedicated to serving Black and Brown folk in dealing with the historical, intergenerational, complex racial trauma that we deal with as human beings. And I usually say I address and challenge white supremacy, which is what I do. But people get that confused because they're like, but what does that have to do with like my day-to-day lived experience, right?
Right.
And so sometimes people don't understand that when we think about the legacy of white supremacy, it's in every single sort of experience that we have as Black and Brown folk, because we live in a sort of racialized society, right? the whole Western Hemisphere, not just the United States of America,
Yes,
but
yes.
all the way, through the Caribbean islands, all the way to Central and South America. Like all of us are sort of inside of this sort of paradigm, and so it impacts all of us, right? Because we think about the beginning of the world we live in, the Western Hemisphere, how it was colonized by Europeans. That sort of legacy sort of lives on today, and it doesn't just manifest when we think about um, racism, and we think about the social injustices that we deal with of systemic oppression. It's not just that, right? It's like, what are like the emotional and psychological wounds that we carry into our families and our communities, right? And how does that lead back to the legacy of white supremacy, which is sort of our it feels like our it's like we've been possessed by white supremacy, and we sort of
Mm,
forgot who we are, right? Because we continue to hear rhetoric that sort of reintroduces these ideas or reinforces these ideas that are intended to dehumanize us. And so we're like under this spell that we haven't got out of yet. And so that's why I talk about white supremacy and sort of tie it back to mental health, because there's no way that we can not have a conversation around it. And because we sort of have to operate inside of a Eurocentric mental health field, right? We're not taught that it's okay to talk about white supremacy as one of the things that has sort of tainted how we sort of experience our lives. Right? We're not taught about, intergenerational racial complex trauma. We're sort of taught, it's all about like the person and the individual and what our symptomology might be and that are presenting issues at that
right,
moment,
right.
right? But it's not like the holistic conversation of like, but how did we come to this point? Like we just got here, like, no. So I think it's important, for me to sort of explain that, because people often misconstrue what I mean when I say white supremacy. They think I'm just talking about like these sort of white supremacist hate groups. I'm really talking about the ideology of white supremacy, right? These ideas and customs and norms that are really intended to exalt and elevate white folk and desecrate and demean the rest of us. And so, and those are the ideas, right? Those customs and norms that we've internalized as human beings, especially Black and brown people in the Western Hemisphere. And that done fucked us up on many, many, many levels.
No,
And
that's
we
true.
just can't see it though. We just can't see it. So I
No,
just want, did that make sense though?
no, that makes a whole lot of sense. And you're right. It's not being taught, and it is either we teach ourselves or like we come across people like yourself and other people who are in doing this work that we like learn about it. Because I mean, there were a couple of professors in grad school that were like kind of touch on it, and obviously, when you're like in a professional setting, you're not gonna have like a whole deep dive into a whole conversation, and you might be like two people of color in the classroom, everybody else is white, and the two people of color are like going back and forth. We're like, okay, it's not like the right setting. Like we can have an offline conversation, keep it going, but it is what it is, and it is important to have these sort of conversations, especially now more than ever. Like all this stuff that we've seen and being like traumatized, like on the news and newspapers, and you go on Twitter, you already like kind of like see crazy stuff. You go on Facebook, you see crazy stuff, and it's like the whole social media and this constant like canceling of people who like think outside the box, and it's not and you got like a straight line. Like there's no
Yeah,
like, there's
you
there's
can't say
there's
anything.
no gray area anymore. It's
No.
either one or the other.
But I think when you think about like even thinking about social media and thinking about how people have conversations on social media, the conversation I think around sort of say white supremacy or racial matters in America have been elevated, whether we like it or not, right? It is what it is, right? And so I think what I believe is happening is that because Black and brown people are becoming sort of aware of what we weren't aware. We're looking behind. We go to the Wizard of Oz and we think that there's really the wizard, but it's really a old white man behind the curtain, sort of running the show. So it's
Right.
like almost like what we're seeing now, that the Wizard of Oz really isn't the Wizard of Oz. Like, is an old white man behind a curtain running things and making us believe in his magic, right? And so I think because we're becoming aware of that, I think it's scary, because scary for the majority, the white folk. I won't even say they're the majority. Right, let's say that different. But for the people who are of the minority in real life, right, it's scary because now we're sort of, our voices are sort of gaining momentum, right? And we're starting to see value in who we are, not based on whether they approve of it or not. We see value in who we are because we see value in ourselves.
Right.
And and we have some people who are vocal about the value that we have in ourselves, and they're teaching us, like our leaders. And so I think the culture is shifting, where we're becoming sort of validated in some ways without the permission of white folk.
Right.
Yes, I think it's an important time in our history.
No, absolutely, and I would like to see more of us, uh, Latino, Latinx, be more, because I think about it from time to time. I have these thoughts in my head. I'm like, all right, African Americans, they had Martin Luther King, they had Jesse Jackson, now they have Tamika Mallory, they got the rapper Myson, like always. If something happens, they always there. Who's who's the Tamika Mallory? Who's the Al Sharpton for us?
I think we have a lot of like leaders. I think we're just not aware of it because, a lot of people who are outspoken are considered divisive. And so what happens is they get censored, right? And so that's really what it is. It's like there's so many leaders out there, Black or Latino identified leaders, who we don't know about because they're being constantly censored. And the people who are fortunate enough to sort of get to a point where they have a platform, right? I mean, that's powerful, but that's not all of the people doing the work, right? That's just very few, compared to like probably the hundreds and thousands of people that are out there sort of advocating for us, Black and brown folk. And so it's just a matter of, in my opinion, sort of censorship. And that's what we're dealing with in this country. Is just always being censored. Like we were talking earlier about the unpacking white supremacy at lives that I used to do. And almost all the videos got deleted except 4 out of, like, it was only 9, but they just kept getting deleted. I'm like, what's going on? We're just having a conversation. But I guess the algorithms are sort of designed to sort of not allow us to talk about these things. And so these are white platforms, these are
Yeah,
not our platforms. And so it makes sense that we keep, even on LinkedIn, like if I post something on LinkedIn, it won't even go anywhere because no one sees it because what it sort of talks about. And so, and the same thing for Facebook. It's like everywhere,
yeah.
everywhere. And so, yeah, so there are people out there. We just don't know about them because we're being so censored and suppressed. Our work is being suppressed.
No, that makes sense. I just wish they wouldn't be as censored, because there's always stuff going on, and stuff within our own people, and it's like we don't get talked about it enough. If it's not like John Leguizamo or like AOC talking and is about like our own issues, and is like we just kind of get left in like the back burner.
On purpose, that's by design.
Well, I'm sure it is.
That's all. It's by design. And it's interesting
But
because, sorry, go.
no, I'm sorry. No, I'm saying even like something simple as, not simple, but freaking Puerto Rico, for example. Look at the even like their own government like can't get in their own way, and the U.S. government, people looking at the U.S. government for help, and the government's like, if y'all can't help yourselves, why we going to help you?
But that's a part of neocolonialism, right? Like it's like Puerto Rico is still a colonized island,
Yeah,
right? So it's really the United States who has Puerto Rico in the condition that it's in. It's not because Puerto Rico can't get it together, is that Puerto Rico has been colonized and still is colonized, right? And
Yes.
so that is what's making Puerto Rico sort of deal with what Puerto Rico is dealing with today. It's not because of Puerto Rico. It's the residual impact of neocolonialism, or being a territory of the United States of America, a Commonwealth as they call it.
Yeah, it's it just frustrates me like what like the lessons from like Hurricane Maria are not being learned. I think that's the American way. You just keep repeating yourself, keep
Well,
making the
it's
same mistakes.
but it's intentional because look who Puerto Ricans are leaving the island, right? Because of the fact that whether their home was destroyed and so on and so forth, that there's not enough economic opportunities. And who's coming to the island to buy up all the property and land?
The whites.
White people. So it's
White
not
love.
like by accident.
Yeah.
It's like, how can we make this island so uninhabitable for the people that belong there, who the natives, the people who were born and raised there, to such a point where we have to they all have to leave, and then other people can come and take over, and then they got a colonized island, and that's the end of our island. So, and there's a lot of work being done when it comes to like advocacy work in Puerto Rico. There's a few, I can't really name people's names because I can't name them from the top of my head, but there's an organization with this fellow. He did a documentary called um, Colonization is Extinction, and his organization is called Ocho.
Okay.
And he goes and speaks to the United Nations, and I should look him up to give you the right name. And he uses his voice, to advocate for Puerto Rico, right, and sort of it being independent from the United States. And so there's a lot of people doing work, and I mean, it's just a matter of whether the government is willing to like give in or not. Basically, how much pressure are we going to put on the United States government to allow Puerto Rico to become its independent, country, versus this Commonwealth sort of colonized island that has no real political power.
Yeah, and it's
I'm
sad
gonna
that.
look up. I'm gonna look the guy up to make sure I say his name. I'm gonna give him a shout.
No, it's important. To me, it just frustrates me more and more. No, I still got people, family, on the island, and it's like, seeing like freaking Logan Paul buying freaking property in PR, and it's like it's just and besides him, not, but like I just recently saw like he just like bought property there, and it's like the gentrification of a whole island is like kind of insane to think about.
It's so crazy, and that is the legacy of white supremacy, right? That's another example of how white supremacy shows up in our lives, and yet and however we're discouraged from speaking about it. Meanwhile, if we look at Puerto Rico and the history of Puerto Rico, and we think about how our families came to be here and all of the trauma that they came with, right? When
Hmm.
you think about that, that's never discussed in mental health. Like, we're a colonized island with a colonized people, and forget about like the beginning, right? When there was the Tainos, right, who obviously was colonized first, and then slaves were brought out, or African people were brought out over to be enslaved. All of that is still part of the legacy of white supremacy, and it's all inside of our bodies, it's inside of our spirits and our minds, and we can't have these conversations in sort of mental health settings because no one is really addressing it. And I'm talking about specifically mental health, because our mental health field is predominantly Eurocentric, and so people who when we go to school, we're not getting trained on these conversations. There
Right.
ain't nobody having them at all.
No, it's so true. Now, what do you see in your work day in day out within your practice? Like, what sort of stuff are you seeing in?
Well, let me just put it this way. I've been in the mental health field for 20 years almost. And so I was a kid when I got into the field through human services first, because my associates was in human services.
Okay.
And then I got my bachelor in human services, and then I got my master's in social work. And so I've always been in the field of social services, right?
Right.
And I've always worked in the inner city, whether it was in Brooklyn, whether it was in Manhattan, whether it was in the Bronx, right? I've always worked with Black and brown people specifically. And and so what I've seen is very across the board the same for all the years. It's never been different, right? Which is the reason why I created my private practice, is because no matter who I spoke to, whether they was, adolescents in junior high school or high school, whether I was in a community-based organization working with young fathers, whether I was working in a high school in the Bronx or in Brooklyn, or whether I was working in the university, my work with Black and brown folk, one thing that was consistent that I saw was this sort of conversation. And then you could be educated or non-educated. It didn't matter. You could have a master's degree or you could have no degree. Right? It didn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter what your education is. It doesn't matter your class status. Right? What I noticed through working with Black and brown folk, through all these years in various capacities, is that there's a common theme that follows us all. It's like this sort of inferiority complex that's sort of inside of our bodies. And it sort of expresses itself in different ways, in various ways. Not everybody expresses this sort of inferiority complex in the same way. I call it the oppressed self, right? And and so as all the years of working, right, that I've been doing, including my private practice now, it's not all of it is a common theme. It's like the same conversation, except different people have different stories. But if you look at the themes or the patterns, it comes back to that sort of the oppressed self. And so, to answer your question, that's the same thing that I see today in my private practice. And it doesn't matter if I'm in private practice. I could be in any space, right, working with my people. The same conversations are coming up. Now, whether people see that or not is a different conversation, right? So my task is, or at least one of my goals is to wake people up, right? Like, can you see the oppressed self, right? Because that's why when you think about the name of my private practice, it's the liberated self, because the liberated self is really the key, right? It's almost like the antidote to the oppressed self. Like, what's the opposite of the oppressed self? The liberated self. And so the theme is like this inferiorized version of who we think we are is what I've seen throughout all of the years I've been in the field. And it doesn't matter where I was located. It makes no difference. Right. And so that's what I've seen, is that sort of, you know what I'm talking about, right? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which leads a perfect segue to talk about your chapter in Latinx and Social Violence too. If you bought the book, thank you so much. Made it a #1 bestseller. Literally 2 days the book came out, so we appreciate it. If you haven't gotten a copy, definitely get your copy, because I've been telling y'all for a while, this book is going to be juicy, and based on Antonio's chapter and my chapter is definitely juicy.
Well, just read our chapters. Don't read anything. We got the juiciest chapters.
Transcending the legacy of white supremacy, which is what we've been talking about it. Now, what was your process like writing the chapter?
Well, first, let me just say, I've been writing in journals since I was 13 years old. So I've been writing in journals for over 30 years at this point. And so I'm used to capturing my life story in a written form, right, through journal writing. That's actually where my self-development started, was through the journal writing. That was the beginning of my therapeutic experience, was through the journal writing. And so writing down my story was not sort of new to me. But I think what was unique about writing this particular chapter is that I had to summarize in just a few words, my life experience.
Right.
And so what ended up happening inside of writing this chapter was I was able to see the level of dysfunction right, that I was experiencing as a child, but not knowing that it was dysfunction, right? Then it was like normalized because that was my norm, right? And so I didn't see it as dysfunction. I saw it as my norm. But in summarizing it for this particular chapter, I was able to see the level of dysfunction and then say to myself, what the fuck was I dealing? Like, how did I survive that? Like, like, wait, it was really almost like a mirror that I saw. I was looking at myself in the mirror, but like my whole life sort of flashing through me through one chapter. And it was just really like it was a profound awareness that I was able to uh, get present to around the level of dysfunction that I was in. And so that really to me was eye-opening, even though I knew it, because I've been writing in journals anyway,
Right.
but I didn't see it so clearly in that way because it is summarized. So it gave me a real perspective of what I've been dealing with. And I think, and so it's not, so I want to just stress that it's not that my people are dysfunctional in the sense that we are innately dysfunctional. It's because we're dealing with dysfunctional environments, right? And it all comes back to the kind of community I lived in, which is the beginning of my life. My formative years where I first lived was Red Hook, Brooklyn, New York. And that was during the crack epidemic in the 80s. And that shit was dysfunctional. But it was the environment that was like that. It wasn't the people per se. And it was based on systemic oppression, right?
Right.
Based on the legacy of white supremacy, not having, resources, living in dilapidated buildings. I mean, garbage everywhere, junkyard on the corner. I mean, it was a classic sort of stereotypical description of what it was to be like in the hood back in the 80s. Like I was really that dusty Puerto Rican kid that you see on a picture, like one of those old pictures that are like bent on the corner, and you see like these dusty Puerto Rican kids, dusty Puerto Rican and black kids, like on an abandoned car or abandoned stoop. That's us. That was me. I was a stereotype. And so I was able to see that through writing the book. Through writing the chapter in the book.
Get out. No, I was like, I was like I told you offline, like I was like, why it had to be only 2,000 words? Because I was like, I was wanting more from your chapter. I think that was kind of like the whole point of only limiting it 2,000 people wanting more. and this is why we having the conversation on the podcast is just telling our stories and really like the book launch was the first time we met in person besides the one or two Zoom calls we had. So it was weird kind of like seeing people, face to face, like, and I from my past experience, like seeing people on Zoom and then seeing them in person, like you don't look nothing, nothing like you do on Zoom,
Yeah.
and it's like you look shorter on Zoom, like or having people that's been on the podcast in the past and finally seeing them in person, like, oh stop. So
Yeah.
it was cool. It was definitely like surreal and having like all the NYU students like representing and having conversations with them and like because I feel like lost in the sauce, like what exactly is going on in these grad schools that is like, I need to be in the know. Like what are they teaching y'all in these freaking schools?
Mm-hmm.
I've been out the loop. It's been over 10 years since I graduated from my MSW. So I'm like, a lot has changed.
Or maybe a lot has changed in our world. I don't know if a lot has changed through the curriculum.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's part of that's the main problem too.
Yeah.
And no matter what school you go to, it's like kind of like the same thing. That what so describe like your experience at the book launch from your perspective.
I mean, the book launch was so fast. I went in and came out. Like it just was a blur. Like just seeing everybody was cool, but uh it was cool. I don't really have much to say about the book launch except It was cool, but it was just like an event, and which is what it was. And I don't really have much to say about my experience with the book launch. It was just the book launch. You know what I'm saying? I don't.
Yeah. It was like somebody mentioned it was like a wedding. Like you go in, it was a blur, and then by the time like we were done, and
It was
it's
exciting and fun, and you guys see all these wonderful people. Everybody was looking fly, and it just came and went, and that was the end of it. So it's like, I guess I've been to events before, and so and it was just like that. It was nice. It was cool, but I don't really have too much to say about the book launch. I
okay.
didn't speak that much. I spoke for like 30 seconds. I thought I was speaking for 5 minutes, but it was really 30 seconds. I didn't want to take up time, you know? And so, but it was nice. I think the only thing I would say about the book launch is that it was a nice space to see a bunch of us, in the space, sort of, and being witness to passionate, Latinx identified people who are in social work. And I say it like that because I'm not a real fan of social work. I'm sorry. I know I'm in the social work rants situation, no shade to social work, but the social work doesn't define me.
Mhm.
I only happen to be a social worker because I happen to, been born and raised in Brooklyn, and this is the construct I exist inside of. I'm really supposed to be either like in some village in Puerto Rico or some village in Africa, being a shaman, healing my community. And so the social work doesn't speak to me, the way it
Mhm.
speaks to a lot of social workers. Like, I don't like, I'm not like bigging up social work. Like, yo, social work. Like, I don't feel that way. I feel very different. I just feel like it has given me an opportunity, the field, to do my work. But my work is the work that I had inside of my body before social work. It wasn't Social work didn't give me my commitment or my purpose. It was something that I feel that I was called to by the universe. And so I'm not a big sort of social worker like type of dude, like all about like the social work field. And because I don't feel that way. And let me tell you something. In my own experience, not all social workers are in alignment with like social justice or anti-racism work,
No,
right? Not all
we
social
seen that the
workers,
last couple of years too.
yeah, we not all social workers want to sort of advocate for our liberation, black and brown liberation. And so I'm not down with the social work field like that because you don't really care about our people ultimately. And it doesn't mean just like white social workers. I don't mean it in that way. I mean black and brown folk as well, like our own
No,
people
no,
are not
absolutely.
even, they don't even care about that kind of stuff. They're like, let me just like go be a case manager and like act like I gotta, son somebody and put them in check. I feel like there's this authoritarian sort of vibe with some social workers that like they have this like sort of permission to be like gatekeepers or like tell people how to live their lives. Meanwhile, their whole lives are fucked up. Like you can't, how you gonna tell, like you need to go look in the mirror before you go and try to school our community. You know what I'm saying?
No, it's true.
Yeah. So I know that went a different way than you was expecting, but that's my real truth.
No, no, and I appreciate your real truth, and we had these conversations. True, it comes from the top, from the and national chapter of the NASW, like disrespecting our black and brown folks during the pandemic. So if it comes from them, like
Well, I mean, didn't with the
and other and
ASW,
other and look at the ASWB, I just like,
like, so what up? What's there to be proud of? Like, really? like, what's there to, because the people that are doing the work that are the people that are doing the work that are there to liberate our people, we're going beyond the social work construct, right? We're not like inside of the paradigm of what it means to be social work, right? Of a social worker. We're not the code of ethics, the way we do our work don't always apply to how we got to do our work. And even the code of ethics, when you think about the code of ethics, there's some things in there that we can't really follow without dealing with sort of negative sanctions, right? They talk about like social justice work and they sort of allude to anti-racism work. But when you're actually in the practice of it, you get in trouble.
yes,
You get in trouble. You don't, your supervisor or whatever organization you work for, they're not going to embrace you. Even though, I mean, that's my experience, working at Rutgers University, which was my previous place that I worked at. I was advocating on the behalf of myself and students and my colleagues, and I was villainized and demonized. Meanwhile, I'm doing social work, but that was not really what I was supposed to do,
Right,
right?
right.
Because I was going against the status quo. And so,
Which is why I said earlier, like you can't have like the conversations that need to have in those type of spaces without either some repercussion or people gonna look at you sideways, or we need to have this conversation like outside of class or
I mean,
or somewhere.
you was telling me that at you saw people's faces when I spoke at the book launch, to take it back to the book launch,
Yeah.
right? It, well, how I sort of took what you were saying is that they was not ready for that. It felt like, right?
Yeah, weren't ready for that, or it was like because what you said to me made a whole lot of sense. And it was like things that we don't talk about, not just in social work, but just in life in general is life. Like, I grew up in hybrids. Like I seen like needles on the floor. I seen like crack vials growing up. Like my mom, God rest her soul, like trying to cover my face, not to see that stuff. So like I saw that stuff, and it's like to crazy that I wasn't offered like any sort of drugs or anything until I got to college. It was the first time somebody offered me something and it wasn't weed, like it was something else to like, and it's like day in, day out, like you see that stuff, and to not have those conversations, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And like one thing that I said at the book launch in particular was that my name is not my name, right? That is Master's name. And because I have a name of a colonizer, like I have Antonio Morales as my name, but that's not an indigenous name. That's not an African name, right? That's a European name. And I feel like in some ways that name, it doesn't represent my essence of who I am, Antonio Morales, because I think about, and even though it's my father's name, it comes from a European name. It's European. So I feel like Antonio Morales as my name or as an identity feels like me accepting the fact that I'm colonized, right? I can't fully embrace my Africanness or my indigenous roots through that name. And so it feels I struggle with that a lot because I know that there's European sort of blood that runs through my veins. And that's a real challenge for me to sort of grapple with that reality, right? Because I'm so um, against white supremacy that I can't imagine that how I came to being, right, is a result of white supremacy, which is a result for many of us. Many of us are the result of white supremacy. And although, I mean, I can see that intellectually, right? But I can't come to terms with it sort of on a metaphysical level. I can't be at peace with that because it feels like the rapist blood lives in my body, right? Like what that represents to African and indigenous people, is rape. And I just feel that inside of my body, like my rapist is in my body. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I
No,
didn't mean to
I
go
get
too
I
deep
took
with it, but that's really what I struggle
no,
with.
no, that's a struggle, that's your truth, and what is no and it's something that you deal with it on a day-to-day basis, and that's your truth, and your truth is your truth. So it's like nobody nobody can like be like, oh, you wrong about that. Like they teach us in social work, like you're the expert, you're your own expert of your life, so
So
that's
you're
your
only an
truth.
expert if you don't rub up against the status quo. Then if you rub up the status quo, they be like, "You sure it wasn't meant a different way? Like, you sure? Maybe you misinterpreted it." That's when you're no longer the expert. Just saying. And I like this Ninja Turtle. People give me like hell for this Ninja Turtle thing, but I feel like when I have these kind of conversations, I need the Ninja Turtles because I feel like I had to tap into my warrior spirit to have these conversations.
No, no, these are conversations that need to be had just in general is not social work, just life in general, and have these sort of conversations. And with everything that's been going on in society the last several years, you internalize that, and that's your daily struggle. So how was it for you that these last like 6 years of Agent Orange running amok? I call him Agent Orange. I'm like Whoopi Goldberg. I don't like saying his name. I don't like saying his
Like,
name.
yeah, you know who. It's interesting because I've always been sort of, before Agent Orange came into office, I was already like about that life. You know what I'm saying? I was already about anti-racism work before there was like this popular term anti-racism. I got exposed to that when I was in my undergraduate program and at one of my, what was I, BMCC? I was somewhere. And I had a professor who, I think it was a political science course. And we just like, the conversations we're having about police brutality, I think Amadou Diallo was, uh, I think Amadou Diallo was in the news at that time.
Okay.
And I would go to like protests. Before Black Lives Matter, there was the October 22nd coalition, which was all, against police brutality. And that's who I knew, like, as an organization, and how they sort of stood up against police brutality. And there was a documentary that we went to see as a class with called Unjustifiable Homicide, or Justifiable Homicide. Is about this Puerto Rican kids in the Bronx, I believe. And Anthony, sorry, my dogs are like looking for snacks. Yo, you gotta chill out before you go back to the shelter.
Talking about Anthony Baez?
No, Anthony Rosario.
Okay.
And his mom. So anyway, it was a story about these two Puerto Rican kids who got murdered by the NYPD, and it was a cover up. It was an injustice, and it was a cover up, and no one did anything. And that really like went into my body, and like that woke me up. I didn't even understand white supremacy yet, right? But I knew that there was an injustice going on in our world that I knew when I was a kid, because they would check my bag when I go to the store. Like, meanwhile, other people could be with their bags, but I couldn't be with my bag, or they would follow me or look at. When I worked at Banana Republic a long time ago, when I was one of my first jobs out of high school, I had to like be at the door, like greeting customers coming in.
Right.
And I remember these two Black kids coming in, and my supervisor, the store manager, told me to go after them and watch them because they were Black, nothing else. There was no other reason. And that happened several times. And I'm like, wait a minute, but that could be me. But I couldn't articulate it yet. I couldn't see what that was. I couldn't see that was white supremacy and happening. And
Right.
I was sort of being directed to be complicit with that. And so for a long time, I've been in this conversation. And so it's not a new conversation for me. But what's interesting about when Agent Orange came in, now the whole world got woken up. Boom. Right? So now I'm not crazy anymore, because now everybody's seeing what's obvious. Because what Donald Trump did was sort of elevate the conversation, for white supremacy to come back out, the woodwork, right? Because white supremacy has always been there, but it's never been so explicit the way we've seen it when Donald Trump sort of started running for office. Right. And we started seeing all this anti-Black, anti-Muslim, anti-everything, right? Sort of rhetoric that was coming out of Donald Trump's mouth. And now it was clear. It was no longer like the secret of America. Like, no, that was back in the day. Like, that doesn't happen anymore. Like, we're like, we have Obama. Like, but Donald Trump was a response to Obama, right? Like, the fact that white America was so enraged that they had a Black president.
And still are.
To go way opposite way.
And they still pissed off.
And so that, to me, what it did for me was not only, even though everyone else was like, their feathers were ruffled, I was already in that conversation. So it was not new for me. I was just glad that everybody else was catching up. Right? Because people will be like, why are you always talking about race? Like they always think like, why? Because it's part of our lives. But then when Donald Trump came in, it became like mainstream, which I
Right.
think that was in some ways it was good and bad because you had the white supremacists being encouraged to be white supremacists out in the
Right.
open. But in another way, it fucking made us not be fucking asleep anymore. Like, oh shit, wait, what's going on over here? Like, you feel me?
Yeah.
And so it felt very affirming actually for people, somebody like me. It felt affirming.
No, that's no, it's powerful that for you doing that. I can't even like imagine like you've been doing this work so much, and then like you've been talking about it, then all of a sudden, boom, it's here, and it's like you see what I've been seeing all this time, like, and it's been out there, like it's just like it's like I don't know, like I guess between Trump and freaking the idiot governor in Florida, the idiot governor in Texas, and it's like we got freaking Marco Rubio, got freaking Cruz, like all these idiots coming like all at the same time, one after another, and it's like who's gonna take turns? And it's like we have 4 years of Trump. It's like he can't do anything else stupid. Boom, the next day he does something else, and it's like boom, the next day something else, and it's like now it is like all this evidence are coming out, and it's like, when you gonna freaking arrest her? Like, what much, what much stuff do you need? And we still haven't even stopped talking about the all the women he supposedly assaulted. Like that, nobody talking about that anymore. It's like, ¿qué más tú quieres to arrest this guy? Like,
But like that's the point. Like the concerns and the alarms have been ringing since before, right? Like we need evidence. Like we already saw his character previously, and so, but that's how powerful white supremacy is. That no matter your character as a white person, you still could get away with anything you want to get away with. That's just what it is. Right? If it was one of us who did even a fraction of what he, let's talk about Obama. If Obama was even slightly the way Donald Trump was, even slightly, he would have never got elected. It would have been a wrap. It would have been a wrap. Right. And so I think, and that's when we see white supremacy. This is what it looks like, right? When we see what happened January 6th, when they did what they did, that's white supremacy. You know what I'm saying? Like, like, why is everyone so shocked that the guy is not arrested or something? Why is the world so shocked? I'm not. I'm like, okay, that's the norm. What are you talking about? When you see, black men in America getting hunted down, right, by police officers who have biases because of how we've been conditioned to believe, right? This anti-black rhetoric that's been conditioned into everyone. Like, they don't even have to do anything but just be black. And they don't even go to jail. Some of them don't even make it out alive from that moment.
right.
So when you see the parallels, right? Who gets treated what way and who gets to get away with everything else, that is white supremacy in front of us. Doesn't mean everyone knows it as that, but I'm just saying I see it as that.
No, I love it. I'm glad we're having this much needed conversation, and especially for MSW students who listen to this podcast. This is great info for you, and it's good to continue having these conversations with your professors and administrators, and put pressure on them that we need to have more and more of these conversations, and always have like I was having conversations at the book launch with a couple of the students, and talking about like what, like, I know I don't like to big them up, but okay, for them, like it was like you had the clinical track, you got like client centered, and you got like there's some macro stuff, or like or research, or research, and it's like, ja, that was it. And like you want to go have gear us to do private practices, but what there's no business class, how to like actually learn how to run a business, but you want to teach about to a private practice. Like there's stuff into like going into like a LLC and learn about business credit, and just all this stuff that goes into like being a entrepreneur. And it's like all these little things that your favorite IG entrepreneurs gloss over that is not talked about, that I've been racking my head for like most of this year doing. I
Word, real
continue to
talk.
do. So
Real talk.
it's like y'all need to have these conversations with your school administrators. It's like if you're still gearing us into this work, like we gotta have at least a class. Like it don't hurt to have like one class at the bare minimum.
At the bare minimum.
And break it down into like, okay, unit 1, we're gonna talk about this for 4 weeks. Unit 2, we're gonna talk about this for 4 weeks. And it's like, at least a class. Like
At least. You got to go to like the small business development centers to get stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's insane. And it's like these internships and it's just a lot that that we went through, and it's like things that have not really changed, unfortunately, that the students are going through now. And it's like, I don't even know how I did it. Like like so like married like 1 year in, like had a newborn, worked full time, freaking like kid was born, is doing an internship, like living in Jersey, and we're going to Queens, like working in
Jeez.
Queens. And it's like I literally was like reading to my son, and like on the floor reading to him, and like passing out on the floor a couple of times, just like
He was grinding.
outside, literally grinding
He was
until.
grinding away.
So it's like I can't even imagine, like especially now. It was like even just as hard or harder now because it's insane.
Yeah, I mean, uh, they don't prepare us for the real world of being in social work or social services. I think internship takes us but so far, but we don't have we have the sort of the school to be advocates. But when we're going into organizations for real, we don't got nobody to advocate on on behalf, right? We by ourselves. We have to sort of speak up ourselves. And so, whoa, yo, the light. And we have to speak up on ourselves, and we don't get the necessary sort of I don't know. I feel like they could train us in a different way. But I'm not complaining about the social work curriculums and nothing like that because I'm not a student anymore. So I got other things I got to deal with now. I'm not gonna be beefing about the curriculums. I was already beefing about the curriculums while I was a student, and the professors looked at me like I was Malcolm X. They thought I was bugged out. They was
I
like, "What's going on with this kid?"
I think looking back, I could have did some more, but I was like too busy. Like, let me get my freaking degree. Let me get the hell out. Like, this shit is too hard. Shoot,
Professor,
research one almost got me the divorce. I mean, eventually I got divorced, but research one was like,
how the research got you
I was
divorced?
so stressed out that like, what wife?
Jeez, I hope it was worth it at the end for research.
And it's funny. I had my research professor on the podcast. I told her straight up, "Yo, your class almost got me divorced." Like,
That's funny. That's mad funny though. But it's not. It's not funny. It's sad
yeah,
too.
yeah. I mean, but it's real because I'm
It
like
is real.
stressed out because research, they don't even teach, like prepare. You haven't been in school in so long, and you're taking like a statistics class, and
Oh
it's
my
all of a sudden
goodness.
being thrown into research, and then you got to take research too right after that. It was like, bro, that was like one full year. It was like just that class alone.
But research is interesting. It sort
It's
of forces you
interesting,
to think sort of analytically about whatever it is that we're sort of looking to understand.
right?
I always liked research. I don't know if research is as dependable as we think it is, especially when it comes to like social sciences and stuff, because you can sort of
It's,
you can read the results and sort of
thanks,
interpret it the way you
I
interpret it.
think, and thanks to COVID, the people don't want to be bothered with research anyway. Like the
Oh
research
yeah,
proves this, and it's like, Get out of here with this nonsense.
COVID. Well, COVID did give us the opportunity to like be able to do like therapy over the, Zoom and stuff, or have
Absolutely.
conversations over Zoom. So in some ways that sort of progressed us because we were so stuck in like this mentality that you had to do everything in a building. Like you couldn't like do actual work outside of a building, right? Outside of like the workplace. I think it really did something for the workforce, transformed the way we could do work.
Absolutely. I hope it continues because there's a lot of stuff in social work that can be done on Zoom that we don't got to be going to the office. And y'all be saving yourselves a lot of money with rent space that it could be put into workers' salaries. I don't
Yeah.
know.
No, it's true. It's true.
But that's a whole other topic for a
That's a whole nother topic.
whole. What's next for you? As my last question.
Ah,
Well,
well,
second to last question.
I'm still building my private practice. So that's always next, right? Continuing to build my private practice. And I really want to I have a few projects that I'm working on, but one of my babies um is the seminar, the Liberated Self Seminar, which is a weekend seminar designed for Black and Brown folk. And basically, what we deal with is supporting, in a community experience, right? Our people with distinguishing, sort of double consciousness, and which is what the voice talks about. And so I call it the liberated self versus the oppressed self, like I said earlier, or the oppressed self versus the liberated self. And is really intended to sort of deal with sort of the psychological chaos and confusion of white supremacy. And that's the whole goal of the seminar. And I've done the seminar before in 2020, right before the pandemic hit, right before everything went on lockdown. And I did it with Rutgers students. And it was powerful, bro. Like, because no one ever had that conversation with me when I was that age. You know what I'm saying? Like, no one ever had the conversation with me, period. Like, forget about when I was that age, right? Ever in my life. And so, based on all of the skill sets and training that I've gotten under my belt, plus my own sort of looking at the research, looking at the literature that's out there, having conversations with people in my community, obviously, it sort of gave me a perspective. It This perspective developed in my mind that became the seminar,
Mm.
and so I'm hoping to do the seminar again, and I want to take the seminar on the road to go to different universities. Um, uh, Especially HBCUs. I really would love to work with HBCUs and bring in the seminar to them because I feel like those spaces would embrace this conversation more than, say, a predominantly white institution.
Right.
I know when I did my particular program, the seminar, the Liberate Self Seminar at Rutgers, white leadership was trying to stop me at every single possible turn you can imagine. Even though all my shit was on point, I already had a reputation for doing seminars and stuff. Everyone knew me for doing seminars, right? That was one of my skill sets. Like people would come up to me in the parking lots and on campus. Antonio, I had no idea who they were, right? You did like a workshop for me, or you did this, and I had no idea, right? But part of my skill set is doing a seminar, right? I facilitate seminars, and so I said the Liberated Self Seminar is my baby, and so that's what's next for me. Like I want to sort of bring that back because now that pandemic is sort of dwindling away, we can do things in person again. And so I'm really looking forward to sort of gearing up the seminar again and taking it to the universities and eventually not just universities but just the mainstream regular public
Right.
where people could come into the seminar. I just got to figure out how to sort of ramp that up, right? I got to sort of gear it up and create momentum for it. But that's definitely what's next for me. And I have this a support group that I'm intending to start up hopefully in November, and it's called Rise. And Rise is about transcending white supremacy in the workplace, because I know that we might be in workplaces. A lot of us are in workplaces where we're dealing with racial discrimination, racial microaggressions, and so on and so forth. And so I said I think I need to create a support group for my community where they can come in and, be provided with some tools based on what I've learned, so they can sort of transcend white supremacy in the workplace. Because I know firsthand what it's like to deal with that, and I also know how to sort of uh, transcend it the way that I did, that I was able to before. So those two things are, and then one more last thing, and then I'm going to shut up. And the other thing is Words of Liberation, which is a podcast that's really dedicated to. I want to interview people who are into liberation work, and not just social work and like mental health. I mean, in general, like these people who are out there, so doing the liberation work. I really want to speak to them about their journeys and what liberation means to them as a way to inspire our people. So those three things are in the future for me.
Awesome. That's beautiful. I love it. Can't wait to hear more about that. It's funny you mentioned historically black colleges and universities, because that's something I was looking into doing myself, and there's a nice big fat one here in Delaware that's really getting the president of the university really doing a lot of great work. So looking into tapping in with them. So hello, Del State. So and I know they homecoming's coming up too. So it's like that was gonna be popping in the next couple of weeks.
And what was your last question? You said you had a last question.
Yes, where can people find you?
Oh. Well, my website is theliberatedself.org. So, anyone can go to the www.deliberatedself.org, and there's a whole bunch of information on there regarding my private practice and the work that I'm doing. And there's also obviously on Instagram at The Liberated Self, and on Facebook at The Liberated Self. And so those are, and on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn, and you can sort of find me on LinkedIn through my name, Antonio Morales, LCSW, or you can go to Instagram at The Liberated Self and just go into the link tree and find me there. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you for this great conversation. It was great.
Yes, my brother.
Talking to you again. Thanks for the laugh, and thank you for the enlightening conversation.
Okay, thank you so much for having me on your platform. I appreciate
it. Absolutely. You have a good one.
You too, brother.
Take care.
Peace out.